welcome to you at Tzu Chi 360. My name is Dilbar Shatterson and welcome back to the UN. You last saw us here at this year's CSW, but this time we're here for the 65th annual UNDPI NGO conference. Over 900 NGOs from all over the world are represented here to focus on and discuss this year's theme, the role of civil society, or us, in the post-2015 development agenda. What is this agenda? Well, on the menu there's poverty eradication, sustainability, human rights, and climate justice. But how does the UN's Department of Public Information, or DPI, attempt to realistically improve those areas this year? Join me through this year's conference as we attend its many events, including NGO-hosted workshops, which you'll see later. But first, let's go meet a familiar face to tell us more about what the DPI NGO conference really means for them. I now welcome back Executive Director of Tzu Chi USA, Han Huang. Thank you for joining us again, and it's nice to see you here in our program.
Yes, thank you so much.
So, we've seen Tzu Chi at the UN before, but what's its relationship to this particular conference and its history?
My personal experience is I had attended the one in 2009 in Mexico City. At the very beginning, I think Tzu Chi is a fairly new and junior organization in the United States and in the United Nations as well. So, not really that many people know who we are and what kind of organization it is. So we have to find a way to promote ourselves. But luckily, we were able to work with other people or other organizations in other occasions, and we were able to find some partnership with them.
There are so many different aspects, areas, legs of the UN. So why is this one in particular so important for Tzu Chi to be involved in?
I think the NGO has a very general audience. As long as you are NGO, you're able to participate. And like today, we can see thousands of people here. So that's the good part for it, because one, we can learn from other people. We can learn from other organizations. And on the other hand, we can share with them what we're doing.
What have been some of the key challenges, but also successes that Tzu Chi has made throughout its growth with this particular conference?
We really try hard to promote ourselves. I remember that 2009, we had an exhibition. But like today, this conference, we were able to have not just a poster section, we also be able to participate 2 workshops, and we actually organized one of the workshops. I think it's a big progress.
So what is the major concept of this year's workshop?
I think the workshop will talk about the sustainability, natural disaster, and it's not only just one of the Millennium Goals for the United Nations. It's also one thing that Tzu Chi Foundation has been doing for a long time, such as disaster relief.
What strength do you feel that Tzu Chi brings to the table here at this conference that perhaps other NGOs may not be able to bring?
I think in terms of disaster relief, one of the uniqueness about the foundation is the inspiration. To me, I think the foundation were able to mobilize volunteers and interact with the survivors or interact with the needy people. And they actually were able to inspire a lot. I think in this kind of conference, people focus more on the data. But I think foundation could take a different approach, meaning that we could focus more on the stories. My personal experience is once you've been to some conference, you tend to forget a lot of things at the end of the conference, but something really impressive, like a very touching stories, you will remember that. And I believe that a lot of people will be interested in foundation. They will want to know more about the foundation.
And what success do you hope to have here today?
I really hope that there will be a lot of people or organization. They'll be able to know about Tzu Chi. What's the Tzu Chi spirit? What's the Tzu Chi's culture? And know more about what Master has taught the volunteers. I think that hopefully would bring some kind of positive influence to the audience and to the other organizations.
Well, I certainly hope you are able to have a positive influence here at the conference.
Thank you.
And now let's go back to the exhibit hall. Now we're in the lobby of the UN Conference Building, where member NGOs display photos and information about their work in this exhibit. This way, they're able to give visitors of the conference a peek at who they are, what they do, and inspire them to get involved. Since space is limited, only 27 NGOs were invited here to have a display, and the Tzu Chi Foundation is one of them. So let's go check them out. So here they're advocating 2 major principles: eating your veggies, and also recycling. And here they're showing you the route of how recycling transforms into relief. So here you'll see how recycled materials have been made into goods that they can use at disaster relief sites. And over here, you see how it's used at the disaster relief site and actually brings some kind of relief to the people that it's affecting. And over here at the bottom, they have a few simple suggestions for everyone who can see to make simple and small changes in their daily lives. For example, conserving electricity, saving water, riding your bike instead of taking your car, and also recycling. As you heard Han Huang mention before, Tzu Chi is among the NGOs that will be hosting a workshop here this year, where the theme is natural disaster, poverty, and sustainable development. They have guest speakers from both AmeriCares and Catholic Charities USA, so let's jump into their presentations and see what they bring to the table.
This is a wonderful opportunity for every one of us, and then we are very grateful. Today's panelist is a wonderful panelist.
Catholic Charities USA is the organization in the United States that provides social services to the most poor and vulnerable across the country. One area that we particularly provide services in is disaster response.
AmeriCares is a global health and disaster response organization that looks to save lives and improve health outcomes in the U.S. and around the world. And each and every day, we put medicines and supplies in the hands of frontline health professionals. Tzu Chi and AmeriCares are part of the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. And in addition to being members of that body, we're also in leadership roles with the Disaster Health Committee.
So our relationship with Tzu Chi has been a great partnership. We certainly do partner with them in the area of disaster response operations. Tzu Chi knows that Catholic Charities has had the opportunity to talk with the family and understand their needs and to share that information with the Tzu Chi Foundation, who oftentimes provides monetary resources for that family in order to help them recuperate.
How can we really interweave our work on disaster risk reduction and preparedness into the work that we do every single day?
The focus of our presentation today was the interconnectedness between poverty, sustainability, and disasters.
It takes an enormous amount of money if you are a vulnerable family to be able to evacuate during a disaster. And organizations like Catholic Charities are there to help them.
There were many stakeholders from different audiences in the conference today, and it's an honor for AmeriCares to take an active part in the UN DPI NGO conference. As part of it, we're excited to share our experience and our expertise in the area of disaster risk reduction and community resilience. We really looked at the gains that have been made across the board with the Millennium Development Goals in the areas of poverty and sustainable development, and we recognize that disasters can set that agenda back considerably. So it's very important for us as a global partnership and global community to ensure that disaster risk reduction and community resilience are part of the comprehensive agenda moving forward.
We have a sister organization, Catholic Relief Services, that does work more on the international sector. And so Catholic Charities USA works strictly in the United States.
Due to climate change issues, disasters, natural events are becoming more severe. And we're finding that there are many communities, mostly in rural places, where the communities and the leadership of those communities are simply just not prepared.
I think what it means for Catholic Charities is just the understanding that we too also have a part to play in the Millennium Development Goals. And I wanted to be able to show that there is also disaster vulnerabilities here in the United States as well. And that it's the responsibility of all of us to be able to step up to the plate and take actions when a disaster strikes.
So what do we do as a faith-based foundation? What can we do? We try to do the recycling work. Not only the polo shirts, we have blankets, which are so warm. You know, a lot of people love that. Our volunteers who are doing recycling work, when disaster happen, they will put down their work, they will go to disaster site and do the relief work.
Doing things in partnership is always a value add, and within the U.S., Tzu Chi, AmeriCares, and Catholic Charities had presented at a national conference addressing very similar issues, and bringing it to an international stage in partnership with Tzu Chi was a very ambitious task, which we were very happy to be a part of.
I think that as each organization works together and exemplifies the faith that they represent, then I think that it works very complementary. I thought that their presentations were very appropriate and very much in line to the kind of work that we do on a daily basis. Catholic Charities is one of its next steps. Might step up to the plate a little bit further and identify how it is also contributing to those Millennium Development Goals, particularly for our representative in the United States.
Turning advocacy into action really starts with one individual. So the messages today were the power that one individual can have towards addressing a big area such as climate change or poverty. So that one individual can be a huge game changer.
While NGOs like Catholic Charities USA and AmeriCares are newbies to this conference, the DPI has actually had a long history with NGOs. The Department of Public Information was formed in 1946 to relay the ideals and explain the efforts and actions of the United Nations to the world. It also strives to interact and partner up with diverse audiences and garner the world's support for peace, global development, and human rights for everyone. Its motto is inform, engage, act. And by bringing non-governmental organizations together for over 65 years, the DPI has been trying hard to live up to those words. So to learn more about the DPI and why it's such a crucial part of the UN, let's hear from Jeff Brez, the DPI's Chief of NGO Relations and co-chair to this year's conference.
UNDPI's primary function is to disseminate information about the work of the United Nations and to advocate on priority issues of the member states of the United Nations. The United Nations is working always with member states to make change in the world and change for the better. And in order to make change happen, you need the peoples of different countries to be involved. Civil society and NGOs provide that link and ground truthing to the peoples of the world. So working with NGOs is very important for the United Nations. There are two ways for NGOs to work directly with the United Nations Secretariat. One is through the Department for Economic and Social Council called ECOSOC. And then there's another group of NGOs who are associated with the Department of Public Information. This relationship has existed for decades. Our objective in associating these NGOs is really to work with them to disseminate information about the role of the United Nations and to advocate for priority issues of the United Nations. Currently, there are over 1,300 NGOs associated with the Department of Public Information throughout the world. This is the 65th DPI NGO conference, and for 61 years, it took place in New York. And they decided that instead of holding it here where it was impossible because the facilities were under renovation, why don't we take it on the road? And so they found 4 countries to sponsor it for 4 years. And then for 2 years, there was no sponsor. And it was impossible to hold it here because renovations were still ongoing. And it's a particularly fitting year for it to be back because it's such an important year. The Millennium Development Goals are coming to a close. Now we have less than 500 days to the end. This is a moment for civil society to have come together, take stock of what's happened so far, and really define together their most important key messages to bring to governments around the world to advocate forcefully for an ambitious and a successful post-2015 development agenda.
We're back here at the exhibit hall where we can find the NGO hosting our next workshop. Let's take a look. This is the board for the Unitarian Universalist Association, which actually has an office here as part of the UN. Over here is the announcement of their event. It's called Interfaith Progressive Values Promote Universal Human Rights. One of the presenters invited is actually Tzu Chi. So while you'll soon see a few familiar faces, let's go from paper to panel and find out why bringing interfaith perspectives together helps further many of the UN's Millennium Development Goals. I'm now joined by Camila Jacob, one of the coordinators of today's workshop. Thanks for joining us.
No problem, glad to be here.
So, can you tell me what's the purpose of today's workshop and also what is the focus of your presentation?
Okay, so our presentation today, we wanted to look at different kinds of religious backgrounds and faith leaders coming together to talk about involvement in the post-2015 agenda. It's really, really important that faith leaders take this leadership opportunity and kind of take charge within their communities to ensure that everybody is involved in this work. And as a born and raised Unitarian Universalist, this is part of my upbringing, my understanding of morals and values and following the UU principles. And I wanted to show that at today's presentations.
What's the history of the Unitarian Universalist Association's engagement with the UN?
Well, the UU United Nations office is over 50 years old. So initially, it was part of the Unitarian Universalist Association. And due to financial struggles, at some point, they had to become a separate organization. And then in 2011, we re-merged with the UUA again. And so UU Voices have been present for many years within the United Nations itself.
You also mentioned that you shared your own experience, your own story. Why do you feel like that is such an important perspective to bring to this audience?
Story sharing is actually imperative to, I think, making anything kind of happen, because something actually the whole UUA is promoting is making sure that we're sharing people's stories. I found a lot of commonalities as I was listening to the other panelists as well today. That's why interfaith panels and interfaith dialogues are so important, because we can find those common goals that we can actually work together.
How did you select the roster of panelists, and also what can you tell me about them?
So we actually do a lot of interfaith events at the UN Church Center. We try to take a lot of initiative to utilize the fact that we are in the Church Center. There's all these different religions in there, right? And so what we wanted to do for this panel was mix it up a little bit, both for our sake, but also because we want to give voice to people who maybe don't always have the platforms in front of different groups.
How has putting this panel together inspired the Unitarian Universalist Association to work together more closely with these organizations?
You know, I spoke a lot about intergenerational work. I really think it genuinely needs to be intricate to the process. Genuinely needs to be understood that that is imperative to have all different ages represented at the table. I'm really looking forward to working with this group, and not only working with this group, but having this group meet our regulars of people that we usually work with different faith backgrounds.
How much do you feel like the goals of the DPI NGO conference have been met by networking and by meeting and working with all these other NGOs?
The conference is a great success in that it does bring all of these different groups of people together, but it also is so important that people take initiative to meet everyone they can. It's definitely exhausting, but it's absolutely worth it.
Well, best of luck, and hope you still have enough energy to make it to the closing session.
Oh, I will. I'm very excited for it.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And now let's take a look and listen to some of the other perspectives from the same workshop.
Muslims for Progressive Values, or MPV, we believe that Islam is inherently progressive, and re-educating Muslims and others about those inherent values. It started out with the Universalist Unitarian Association, meeting them and them voicing that there is a need for a Muslim voice within the context of faith. With some support from other organizations, we applied for the UN DPI status, and so we are officially a consultative status with the UN.
In order for Muslims to help inspire and achieve the ideals of the United Nations post-2014 towards a sustainable development where no one is left behind.
Well, I think for us it is really important for the broad-based NGO organizations here at the United Nations and convening here for this conference to know that there is a different way of looking at Islam, and how we as progressive Muslims are really redefining and uprooting and debasing a lot of the human rights abuses in the name of religion. We cannot allow for religion to be used as an excuse for human rights abuses, like for FGM, for honor killing, for all the various issues that we are grappling with on so many levels. And so this panel was a way for us to express those views.
I'd like to just introduce one of them.
When the representative from Sokogakai spoke, adaptation of the sacred text into simple Japanese text as a way to reach to many farmers and other citizens who were uneducated, that was an aha moment, because for us, that was something that we recognize has been an issue, because there is tremendous population in the Muslim world who are uneducated and they do not read. And even if they memorize the Quran, they memorize it not knowing what it means. So what we've been doing is partnering up with Muslim scholars. So for example, my presentation on Sharia law today is actually based from a professor who is a professor of law and Sharia at Emory University in Atlanta. So we worked with him in adapting his scholarly writing into simple English. And this needs to be translated into different languages, and that's what needs to happen.
It's built up a channel of care, of love. Together, we can make it happen. And every one of us still have our own identity.
A lot of non-Muslims, all they hear is the extreme voices in the media, and the media reports a lot on the conservative and extreme voices. And then they don't hear the normal Muslims like us And so when they come and they hear that there is a different perspective to Islam, and this is what we're advocating for, it diffuses their fear of Islam. We always believe that the way to change the world, in the Muslim world especially, is through youth, and for us to provide the content, to develop content that is easily shareable. By doing that, you are bypassing their parents, you're bypassing the imams, all the religious institutions, and you're bypassing the government. And that is the best way to educate the next generation, or the current generation that is really looking for something more just.
So now we're here at the Dag Hammarskjöld Library, where for the past 3 days of the conference, youth participants have been gathering at these early morning conversations to connect with their peers and tackle contemporary issues across all fields. The goal? That these meetings will inspire the UN's freshest participants to form concrete and feasible projects when they return to their respective organizations, universities, and communities. So let's go find out why and how young voices play such a valuable role here at the UN.
So today I want to talk to you about the He for She campaign.
This is absolutely critical, especially for us as young women. Our mandate is to advocate for girls' rights and women's rights in the empowerment, and we simply can't do this without the youth. The youth voice is so critical. You know, we need to re-energize them, we need to engage them, and we need them for the innovation and their passion and creativity in helping us to achieve gender equality. We are very honored and very energized. For me today was energizing to see these young voices, to see the passion that the youth have, and to know that, you know, we have the support of them to actually implement the changes that we need to see happen.
We are not creating a campaign, we are creating a solidarity movement, and with that, it does require us to look at how we can actually create the impact.
I am 20 years old. I've always seen that the fight for gender equality, taken into a man point of view, it's always about men or boys. We're also on a perfect time in our lives to change of attitude, to change behavior, and that's why I started the first coalition of young men around the world that fight actively every day for gender equality.
Thank you too. It gives me great joy when I see young people pushing for such change.
I think that young voices are very valuable and are always seen and noticed as something very fresh. So now we have the chance of making our life better and designing our futures by putting our ideas into a reality.
Gender equality is not a mission impossible. It is the mission of our times. And thank you for being here with us.
To mirror their ideals, former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan once said that we live in an era in which international affairs are no longer dominated by states as the sole actors. The participants include non-governmental organizations, national parliaments, private companies, the mass media, universities, intellectuals, artists, and every woman and every man who considers him or herself to be part of the great human family. Which is why now your efforts are more valuable than ever. That hope is here at the UNDPI NGO conference this year, especially through the power of its youth, and especially through the power of people like you. Thanks for joining me this time. I'm Dilvar Chatterson, and from the UN, I'll see you soon.
Shrine, a mosque.